Let me know when you got your Facebook cranked. We're good? Well, welcome everybody. You're tuned into the Brainstorming the Human Connection program, brought to you by your local, statewide South Dakota Humanities Council. I'd like to thank them for putting on this opportunity for everybody to have a conversation with each other. This brainstorming doesn't mean you have to have a solution to anything or even a good question. It's just throwing out ideas, wrestling with ideas, learning new things, new ideas to wrestle with, and trying to exchange information between ourselves, because there's this idea that none of us will ever be as smart as all of us. So if we all put our heads together and think about something, as much as we're aware, we have to first become aware of the thing. And if we can become aware of the thing and just see your awareness and you see my awareness, we exchange that, then we all end up knowing something that we didn't know before. So this idea, this concept of this program is, one, to bring information to you that maybe people haven't thought about or thought about very deeply. And two, to give ourselves some opportunity to have conversation in an air quotes safe environment. You know, unless there's somebody in your house that's unsafe, it should be safe, you know, to have this conversation. I say all of that to say we look forward to your participation. Ask questions, provide some answers to what you think are questions. Look for new ideas, explore those ideas. That's what brainstorming is about. It's kind of like spitball. You know, just like, well, what happens if? You know, let's run some what if scenarios. But the bottom line is, let's have a conversation. Let's have not only a conversation with each other, but conversation even with ourselves. Like, oh, why do I believe that? Huh? Where did I get that idea from? Oh, that's what I was thinking. That's why I did that. That's where I came from. So I'm hoping that you'll participate. Today's guest is another special person. She is Terri Davis, and she is at the Rapid City Public Library, and she's running the thing over there. And we're going to be talking about, again, libraries. Now, this, of course, isn't the first time we've talked about libraries. But actually, I don't think we can talk about libraries enough. But today's subject is the new books. You know, what new books are out there that maybe you might be interested in? What books are they seeing? What's trending in terms of new ideas? A lot of people don't read very much, but they don't know that there are exciting books out there that will, add something special to their lives. And often they see a book and it's really thick and they say, well, I'll never read that. With the idea that you have to sit down and read the whole thing. You know, you could read like 1 or 2 pages. And if it's a 300-page book, by the end of the year, you got that baby conquered, you know? So just, as they say with eating elephants, you don't try to swallow the whole thing at one time, you know, just a little chunk at a time, and you'll get it done. But we're going to be looking to Terri today to tell us about any new books. Terri, welcome to Brainstorming the Human Connection.
Oh, thank you very much. It's going to be fun to be here. I see a couple of familiar names in the list of participants, and Mike, I'm hoping we can call on you also as a former librarian to share some of your insights as well about, yeah, thumbs up, good, about good books. I will admit that my reading style certainly has changed over the years too. When I started reading, I would devour every word in the book because I was a quiet kid. I loved reading. I loved the words. I loved the language. And because I was a reader and not a talker, I also know that I mispronounced words as I grew older. I didn't know that subtle had a silent B in it, for example, because I read it on the page and it looked like it said subtle to me. But
You mean it's
anyway,
subtle?
what's that?
You mean it's not subtle?
Hey, sorry to let you in at this point, but that's the way it goes. So yeah, I devoured every word on the page, whether I pronounce them appropriately or not. But as I got older and time is not what it was, I also don't commit myself to reading every word cover to cover. If I pick up a book and I start it and it hasn't grabbed me right away, okay, it isn't saying anything about the quality of the book itself. It's just saying that it's not speaking to me at that moment. So I'll move on to something else. Lawrence, I think you said that you read the blurb and the table of contents and the index.
Contents and table of contents and index. And if there's a foreword, I might read that if I recognize that there's a person that I respect or something. If it's somebody I don't know, it's just like meeting somebody on the street and they say something. It's not a thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And then any librarians out there may recognize the name Nancy Pearl. She's a librarian and a book talker and a bibliophile. And she would say that she would read the first couple of chapters and then the last chapter of a book. And if she wasn't grabbed by what happened at the beginning and what happened at the end, she wouldn't bother with the rest of it. But often she would. And having read the end, she didn't think distracted from the story along the way. So, we all read in our own ways, and some of us read by listening to the books, which is perfectly legit too. And can we really truly multitask and listen as we're doing something else? Well, perhaps, but we're still getting it somehow. So it works. By the way, as I look at the screen, I'm going to apologize for the background behind me. I did a Zoom with somebody last week and they asked if I was in prison. And
I apologize too, because people think I'm in the jungle.
Well, there you go.
It's just out there. It's out there.
Yeah, they said all I needed was the placard that I held up with a number on it. But we're doing some renovations here at the library and I'm in a temporary office. So that's what I've got behind me. Anyway, yeah, I did some digging. I will confess I'm a nonfiction reader. So those of you who read fiction, I have some title recommendations for you. But if you have any, I would love to have you share those. But I'll start with nonfiction because, hey, that's what I read. It looks like, scanning the list of what's coming out in the coming months, there are, perhaps not surprisingly, a lot of social issues that are being addressed in the literature that's coming out. There's one due out in March called Poverty by America. And that's the title. The author is Matthew Desmond. And it delves into why poverty still exists in the United States. And when you think about it, I mean, why does it? We're still seen by many as the primary country in the world, first world nation. We've got all these advantages. We've got all this wealth. Why do we still have poverty? Why is there that such a distinct separation between the haves and have-nots? So I'll be interested in seeing what that book has to say and how the author delves into that conversation.
Who is that by?
Matthew Desmond, Desmond, and it's slated to come out in March. I don't have the publisher information. Sorry about that. LGBTQ plus issues are being addressed in literature, both in fiction and nonfiction. There's one title coming out in May. I'm going to not get this author's name particularly well. Amelia Posanza, Possanza, and it's called Lesbian Love Story. And what this author does is she's pulling stories and histories together to give different takes on what life and love and sharing and compassion and caring is really about, perhaps in situations that we might not otherwise have seen as normal relationship situations in the past. Oh, thank you, Jennifer, for sharing that link. I appreciate that. Poverty by America. But yeah, the lesbian love story coming out in May. There's another book. I have to admit, I had never heard of the person who's the subject of this book. It's called Liberated, The Radical Art and Life of Claude Cahun. And I may not be saying that name correctly either. It's Cahun. Now, I don't know if this individual was French or German, but this is someone who was a surrealist artist and lived during the time of the Nazis and really kind of pushed the boundaries of safety and security and put their life at risk in the Nazi regime. So this individual really blurred the lines between male and female, between artist, between activist, between what is socially acceptable and what is avant-garde. And when you think about it, that is a really brave thing. Well, it's still a brave thing to do in some areas, let's face it. But certainly at the time of the Nazis, a very brave, perhaps a reckless thing to do. But I had never heard of this individual before, and I'm somewhat intrigued now and am going to do a little bit more digging. That book is due, it's not due till September. So that's one to wait for, but it's also published in a graphic format. So many of us are familiar with graphic novels. This obviously is not a novel, but it's a graphic biography, graphic history. So the format is going to be intriguing for that one as well. I'm looking forward to seeing what that comes out. The author of that one is Kaz Rowe, R-O-W-E. Anybody with us, a teacher or former teacher?
Yeah, raise your hand or say something. Pop up. Anybody? I can't see. I'm not
seeing any hands come up.
I was a former teacher.
Excellent. Okay.
Who was that? Who was that, by the way?
Lenny Covey.
Okay, because I couldn't see your. For some reason, I can only see Terri on my screen. Okay, go ahead, Terri.
So yeah,
anybody else who's been a teacher?
Sharon, you raised your hand. Okay. Yeah, this book that's coming out is called The Teachers, A Year Inside America's Most Vulnerable, Important Profession. And that's by Alexandra Robbins. It is also due out in March, so we don't have too long to wait for that one. But the author is an investigative reporter, and she followed 3 teachers throughout the course of the school year. One was an elementary school teacher, one was a 6th grade math teacher, and one was a middle school special ed teacher. And so she went on this month-by-month journey with them throughout the school year, finding out their rewards, their challenges, their day-to-day successes, their bang against the wall failures or frustrations. And then in addition to talking with these teachers and focusing on these 3 teachers, she solicited comments and feedback from teachers across the country who shared their experiences in teaching. I am not a teacher. I've never been a teacher. I have a niece and a great niece who both teach primary grades, and just hearing some of their stories, it's rewarding, it's frustrating, it's gut-wrenching, it's exhilarating, all those things come together with it. And so I'm looking forward to this book, and since it's due next month, it won't take too long for it to be here.
Can you say the name of the book again and the author?
Yeah, the book is The Teachers: A Year Inside America's Most Vulnerable, Important Profession. And the author is Alexandra Robbins, Robbins. And then the final nonfiction title I want to talk about is, if any of you listen to National Public Radio and listen to All Things Considered, you've heard Ari Shapiro. He has a book coming out called All the Best Strangers in the World: Stories from a Life Spent Listening. And he talks about his experiences growing up as the only Jewish kid in his school or community, knowing he was gay and the only gay kid in his high school. So he pulls all of those experiences together and shows how those experiences helped him to make connections with really disparate groups of people around the world, really. And then, very interestingly, he also has a side job as a singer. So I had not known about that. That book is coming out in March. That's one that I already have my hold request on, because I really do want to read that one. So that's what I have for nonfiction. I don't know if any of you want to share nonfiction titles with us, something that you're looking forward to, or maybe something that you just read that's new and of interest.
I would certainly be interested in that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to list We Are the Stars by Dr. Sarah Hernandez. And that book launch will be in 28th of February. But it is, how did she put it now? Colonizing and decolonizing the Ocheti Shakoi literary tradition. And she's done extensive research about the experience of Christianity in Native early Christian intervention into communities on the reservations and some prior to that. So that's a very good book to put on your list as well.
Thank you for that.
We Are the Stars.
We Are the Stars.
And it's in the chat, by the way. It was put in the chat, link to it, I think. I'm very grateful, Nico, that you brought that up. And I think that there are a lot of books, particularly for Native culture and about things about Native, that are out there that I kind of stumble on or something like that. But they seem to, unfortunately, not get the promotion, or let's say they don't rise to the level of consciousness. But I think that's going to be up to all of us to share, as you're doing, to let us know the books that you know, and then we can become aware of them.
I would like
thank
to
you.
add to that. You just brought something up regarding literature and how unavailable some of it is.
Hmm.
Well, the Oak Lake Writers Society now, the Oak Lake Writers Society has had a name change, but what I wanted to mention was that there was a study done regarding the listing of books that are all about the Oceti Sakowin. And Sarah Hernandez did the research on this. And if a person would go to firstnations.org and ask for native reads, you would get a list of all of these books. There's over 200 of them, and many of them are not in the libraries of South Dakota libraries. And so that's a very good thing to add to your information contact.
Mm-hmm. And also, I think it's useful to say that if you find a book that you find particularly interesting, and it is not in your library, it doesn't hurt to suggest it. I know that the libraries I deal with, they have entertained my suggestions very well, for books. And I have to say, I have a more esoteric reading habit, but I see them show up. So I say it doesn't, beats a poke in the eye with a hot stick. They're not going to beat you up for suggesting a book. So doing that, and also that book list that you mentioned, the people on this call, we're spread around the state and sometimes in other countries. So, if you have a suggestion that you read a book, or if you're interested in a book, it sounds interesting, talk to your librarians about that, I would say.
That's a great point I'd like to pick up on. Our collection certainly, and I can't speak to other libraries around the state, but our collection is largely suggestion driven. Obviously, our librarians know to watch out for, the next great book by this author or that author, or fill in these topics in our collection or something like that. But generally, people will suggest things as long as it meets our collection criteria, which it generally does. We will do our darndest to get it. And that is how the majority of our collection is driven. So yeah, talk to your librarian. If they don't already have a form online or a form available somewhere, talk to your local librarian about getting the things that you want to see in your library, because chances are they'll make it happen.
Well, and along those same lines, many libraries, I won't say most because I haven't done any studies, but many libraries have like conference rooms, meeting rooms, and stuff like that. So if you do find a book that you think is particularly interesting, invite your friends and make it a library event, and they can invite people in the general public to join in a conversation about that book, especially if it's an issue of which you think you would like discussion about, or you would like more people to know about. I would say help the library out by being a participant, as an active participant, as opposed to just wait till like somebody else has to lead. Seems to me, at least that's the experience I have with libraries.
Yep, I'll second that. We have a number of book groups that come here and have informal discussions, and they just launch them on their own. So yeah, definitely. Oh, let's see, 2 nonfiction books. Very interesting. I'm not seeing the entire comment, I guess, but looks like in the comments there are more book suggestions coming in. So thank you for that.
Right. If anybody who can read them, if you can share them. Some people like for example, it's hard for me to see those chats. Who's on the chat. But if you could tell us what are people saying. Jennifer,
Yeah.
did you?
So this is Colby. I'm
Colby.
happy to help out here. So Sharon put a comment in the chat. She said 2 nonfiction books she got at the Book Fest last year. One is This Stretch of the River, and then the other one is Ecology of Dakota Landscapes, Past, Present, and Future.
Mm-hmm. It would be nice if who was it that suggested that?
Sharon.
Sharon. It would be nice if Sharon could tell us a little bit about what those books are about. Sometimes the titles are not necessarily intriguing, but the subject could be. Maybe even if you could put it in the chat. Did she put anything in? Okay, well, we'll continue on, but if you have I would love to have any suggestions that you have. But in the and also if you could say something about the book or something like that, that would be useful as well. Was there another one that got added there, Colby?
Jennifer just added more information about this stretch of the river, a link to the more information about it.
Okay, excellent. Terri, let's switch a little bit to, I know you said that, like most of the books you read are nonfiction, and that's me too. It's like, I always feel like reality is kind of fiction to me. So I'll go to the nonfiction books because I'm looking for new ideas to understand the things that I see every day. But let's talk a little bit about fiction. Can you talk some about the value of fiction? What is fiction?
Oh my goodness. Vicarious living, letting your imagination go to places that you couldn't otherwise have imagined. I was talking to somebody the other day about the book Dune by Frank Herbert, a science fiction that I read in high school, I think. And I was still able to quote something from that book from memory. And it's been a darn long time since I've been in high school, I can tell you. So, just something about that resonated with me. And is that something I would read now? Unfortunately, probably not. But it did expand my horizons enough at that time. And, the language in fiction is different than the language in nonfiction, I think. If you're a fiction reader, just the structure of the story is put together differently. I'm kind of talking myself into reading fiction, actually, I think.
I did that same thing. See, I tricked you. But
yeah.
I used to be, I think that before I got this recent interest in fiction, I think the last fiction book I read was like in grammar school with like Daniel Boone or something. It was supposed to be, based on some real story, but we know that those guys, they weren't really nice people, but
right.
They tried to make them heroes because somebody needed, an exciting story and to make a hero out of people who are really kind of psychopaths. But at any rate, I have grown an appreciation for fiction that I have never had in my adult life, And part of it is I've had to come to the bald-faced reality that humans deal with narratives more than they do data, And so even if you have good data, if you have something to say, if you can put it in a narrative form, it's as though you have processed it to a point that people can make sense of it. The humans have developed with storytelling, at the earliest time, when they had the slideshows on the caves that they drew the pictures, and the buffaloes, apparently it wasn't like how many buffaloes are out there. It wasn't about that. It was about the adventure. People would go on mission, vision quest or walkabouts or something like that, and come back and share their stories, or they would have dreams and they would talk about what happened in those dreams. So narratives, more than a spreadsheet, is how human beings make sense of their environment. So can you talk about any kind of experiences that you've had as a librarian with fiction books making any impact on their readers?
I remember when I was at the Deadwood Library in the 90s, there was a young boy who came in. At that time, he was probably in elementary school. And smart kid, smart kid. I mean, but if you want to talk about a geeky nonfiction reader, you know, it was probably that kid. But there was a fiction book that he loved and he checked it out. And I don't remember the title of it. It was about a dog, about a boy and his dog, or you know, something like that. But he checked it out and he returned it because he was a good library user, and you know, came back later, checked out the same book, and I remember talking to him. I said, don't you want to check out, you know, some different books? Would you like to read some different books? No. It was that one all the time. And this didn't go on just for a short time. This went on for a couple of years as he was growing up. And then finally, when he was in middle school, he came in and he said, well, you know, I know you take books out of the library sometimes when they're not interesting anymore, and you have a book sale and you get new books in and that kind of thing. He said, would you ever think about taking that book out of the library so I could buy it? And I said, well, you've kind of defeated the process because you've been checking it out all this time, making it very popular. But
and he's used it up now. He's made sure he has dog ears.
But you know, the thing that resonated him, and I finally got it out of him, is he wanted a dog. His parents had said absolutely no dog. And I don't know if it was allergy or they just, I don't know what it was, but no dog.
They were
And
mean. They were mean.
and something with that story and the way it was written and the boy and his dog and their relationship, whatever it was, just resonated with him. And he checked that book out on and off for a couple of years. And finally I did withdraw it so that he could buy it from a book sale. But you know, it was that you, Mike? Or Mike has another story about that. But I mean, talk about fiction resonating with someone.
Well, I could talk about stories about people with books, but there's a couple books I'd like to mention. Actually, one is an author, South Dakota author, M.K. Coker, writes a series about a lady who is a sheriff in South Dakota. Very good, very well written, new author. Another book I'd like to mention is Shutter. That's Shutter. The author is Ramona Emerson. It's about Navajo women. It's very well written and really does give you a feeling for that particular part of the world. You have to stick with it. You just a heads up from my wife. You have to stick with the book to really get into it before it gets really good. Now, you want a story about people with good books? Had a lady come in one time with a book, new book, that was just soaking wet. And I happened to be at the cert desk. And she came in, said she wanted to pay for it. And I took it, looked at it and said, yeah, could I ask what happened? And she got the funniest look on her face. She said, I was reading it when I got in the shower.
And I didn't notice. that happens, you know. But I should mention, for full disclosure, Mike spent many years as a librarian, and he was like the librarian when I think when I first started going to the Watertown Library. Great, I think you know. So he has lots of stories. I'm sure he's kind of like out of that business formally now, but do you have any other stories, Mike?
Okay, here's one. I didn't learn to read until I was in 4th grade. Okay. At that point in time, they took me out of school and said, gave me 2 days worth of tests, came back and told my parents, kid smart, he just can't read. The school principal spent the entire Christmas vacation teaching me to read. When school started back, what he did, first off, is he looked at what I was reading and said, you're not interested in, C-Spot Run. Took me then to the 5th grade and said, here, let's find an adventure book. So we did that, we read that. But more importantly, once school started back up and he decided that, oh, you're in 4th grade, you're now reading at 5th and 6th grade level. He took me across the street and introduced me to the librarian at the public library, who then started saying, hey, here, why don't you read this? Why don't you read that? So there's a library story for you.
Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Anyone else have any stories that you can share with us about people reading books and how the books have influenced them?
Yes, I just wanted to share a comment. It's very interesting how COVID has pretty much shuttered us all in. And a very good friend of mine from graduate school asked me what I was reading to keep myself sane. And I said, I would like to read something about our own history or something historical that is also a levitation from what it is we're all about here. And she said, I think you'd really like to know, since you're Indian living where you are, why don't you go ahead and read Nelson DeVille's books? They're older, but they're fictional, but he wrote about the Gold Coast and wealthy and on the East Coast. And I read that book and I thought, oh my gosh, this guy's really a great writer. And also he keeps me tied to the storyline, but he also really fleshes out life like the wealthy in a period of our history that is fictional, sort of like F. Scott Fitzgerald's Great Gatsby. So just recently she said, so how'd you like DeMille's books? And I said, well, I've read the first 2. She said, well, with everything going on in Russia, do you want to know a little bit more about lifestyle there? And I said, yeah. She said, read The Charm School. And I have not been able to put that book down. It is fictional, but it is loaded with an inside track of what culture is like there through the characters. So yeah, it's very interesting.
I will have to say I'm fortunate to have a good friend also who reads really great fiction, and she recommends titles to me to offset my nonfiction habit, and I do usually pick them up. I don't always read them, but I make it my best effort. But yeah, Nelson DeMille's been writing for a while. I'm going to pick up that Charm School. That sounds like an interesting one.
Anyone else? Sharon?
Yeah, well, my story isn't unique, so that's why I'm telling. I lived in Mobridge as a child and girl, and a pretty non-literary background. And the town is so small, even then, a child, 10, 11-year-old kid could walk around and, no problem. And one day I was down on Main Street and I found this big, nice looking building, the library. So I wandered into it and the librarian said there were books for my age kids. And that just astounded me because there were no books like that in school. I mean, we were past Dick and Jane, but the books that we had were textbooks. And so she pointed out this one book, Blue Willow, and I just fell in love with it. So, sorry, get emotional. So I kept taking trips to the library, and that was kind of a saving grace in my town, I thought. And just recently, maybe 2 months ago, I checked out the book Blue Willow from the public library system here. And I didn't remember it at all, the story, but I do remember the title, and I was so intrigued by it. And I think that's what started my reading. So here's to all small libraries or big libraries.
I think that's a very interesting phenomenon. I'd like to at least probe a little bit. The reading of a book that you feel that's impressed you, but then later in life, you have a whole different recollection of what the book was about, if you can remember it. Maybe you remember, as you said, the title, but the book, the story, especially narratives, the experience of a narrative, let's say, changing over time. I compare it to a piece of rusted metal. It's the same thing, but it keeps changing over time and getting a different patina. So does anyone have a similar story where the story changes, just like aging cheese or something? Yeah, Betty?
Yeah, Sharon, that's so touching to hear you speak of that book. I'm sure I was in high school, and it was probably a book I ran across either in the school library, but more likely the public library, which I think at that time was temporarily housed above Webb Shoes or someplace while they built the new one. And it was a book about the Holocaust, and I believe it was the Bergen-Belsen camp. And it is the only thing I ever heard about the Holocaust. And at that time, it would have been late 1950s, early 1960s, somewhere in there. And I don't think I even spoke of it to anyone. It was so horrifying. I had difficulty, assimilating that this really was something going on. And so now I go back to that and realize how we were kept away from that information. And I wonder sometimes, did my parents know about it? So that has stuck with me. And then, oh gosh, now I can't keep track of my own thoughts here. Oh, I think it was also in high school, a book called The American Way of Death. I should be able to say her name, but my parents must have sheltered us more than necessary. I had never been to a funeral. I think I attended my first funeral when I was in my late teens. And I don't really know what the reasoning was on that. It made me kind of afraid of going to one. But I was walking around in the corridor that went from our high school main building around to the other building, and we had to go by the Aberdeen Civic Arena to get there. And the doors were open one day when it was around noon, and the undertakers were having a convention. And I know we weren't supposed to go in there, but a friend of mine and I did. And I at that point, I had never been into a mortuary or to a funeral, seen a dead body. And to go in there and discover that caskets, and of course, they were showing their best available, most expensive, I'm sure. It had a cutaway of the mattress, and it had a scene painted in the lid of it. And they had special clothing in which to bury people, and shoes and bottles of chemicals and stuff. Those two things, obviously they're still with me after all these years. So yeah, and I went and found her book after that, I guess. I ran across it. I went to the convention first, and then I was led to read her book about the American way of death as compared to perhaps the English way, where in earlier times people were buried almost as soon as they died, and compared to how we do things here. Fascinating stuff. And it stuck, it really formed my opinion about a lot of those things, which I've not varied much from, being a stubborn-minded woman. Thanks for this very interesting discussion today, and I'm making notes.
And I will, on that note, I will remind people that there are lots of links to books being put in the chat. So if you are paying attention, you can see some books over there. And don't forget that down in the right-hand corner, usually, depending on your operating system, there are 3 little dots. And if you press on those, if you punch in or press on the 3 little dots, you should be able to download all of those, the chat, all of the things that's being said in the chat. And that way you can keep track of that. And maybe we can put it also in when we put it up online, the archive, when we archive this, people can see it too, or put it in someplace down below in our YouTube channel, but these are very good suggestions. And it also suggests a way that we can share what we learn from books. And if we find a good book, don't keep it to yourself. If you find a good idea in a book, share it with people, because that's the kind of thing that connects us. Terry, back to you.
To me. Well, should we lighten up a little bit maybe and talk
Sure.
about some kids' books?
I was kind of getting into the death thing, actually.
Yeah, well, just to throw a couple of kids' books in here, because I will say that kids' books are not only for kids. I enjoy reading kids' books once in a while. And I wasn't familiar with this series I'm going to talk about, but I am familiar with the Captain Underpants series. Mike, you're probably familiar with those as a former librarian. Others may have heard of the Captain Underpants series, wildly popular with kids. Anyway, that author has written another series called The Dog Man. And the latest book coming out in that, I think it's the 10th or 11th in the series, is called 20,000 Fleas Under the Sea. So definitely has a tongue-in-cheek humor there, but it's a grade school age book, early grades. Kids are going to love it and think something might be a little bit naughty, just like, the Captain Underpants, the idea of him running around in his underpants was maybe just a little bit naughty, but funny as well. And the kids devour those things, especially something in a series. If you can get them starting in the first book in a series and they love it, yes, they're going to keep going, and they clamor. When is the next Dogman book coming out? Or when is the next Captain Underpants book coming out? So they love it. And frankly, anything to get them reading is a good thing. There's another series that is also done in the graphic format, so kind of comic booky, but not really. It's called Discover Graphics Global Folk Tales. And the new one coming out, well, that came out last December, I guess, so not a forthcoming book, but I'm going to butcher this name, I apologize. It's called Hiaka and Panewa, and it's about Hawaiian folk tales. So they take folk tales from anywhere around the world and put them in this graphic format, making them interesting and appealing to kids. The reading age on this one is like 5 to 8 year olds. But they also have folk tales from Sweden and Peru and China, so they cover the gamut. The same publisher also has Discover Graphics Fairy Tales. So they take the classics fairy tales and give them this graphic format spin. Again, still telling essentially the same stories, but popularizing them in a different way that may make them appealing to kids today who are used to manga and video games and all of that sort of stuff. So those are some interesting books. And then there's a read along that I think sounds fun. It's called 20 Questions. And when I was a kid, I was a questioner. I was always asking why? And to the point where my dad teased me for asking why. But, you know, it's the way I learned. It's the way other people learn. And kids just ask questions. So this book is by Mac Barnett. The title is 20 Questions. It really looks like it would be a great read along with little kids. It's a picture book format for younger readers. That's due out in March. And the premise is that, you know, there's lots of questions. Some questions don't have an answer. Other questions have multiple answers. So I'm intrigued to see what that one is going to be like. And I'm slightly disappointed that my grandkids are too old for enjoying a book like that. But that doesn't mean that I can't enjoy it. And then I talked about social issues in terms of nonfiction books when I was speaking about those. That's also being addressed in kids' books. There's a couple books about climate change that one came out last September. It's called Haven Jacobs Saves the Planet, and the author is Barbara D. D-double-E. It's for grades 4 to 8-ish. I always hate to give grade levels when I'm talking about kids' books, because obviously there's such a diversity of skill sets in terms of reading, but that's the way they're promoting this one. And it is talking about issues of eco-anxiety that some young kids feel. And when you think about it, you know, we as adults will talk about climate change and pollution and ozone and carbon dioxide and saving the planet and all of that kind of stuff. But when the kids are picking up on these conversations, you know, this is the planet we're leaving to them. What are they thinking about this? And what kind of concerns and anxieties do they have? So that's what this book deals with. And then there's another one called 2 Degrees by Alan Gratz, Gratz. That also came out last fall, grades 4 to 7-ish. And that's told from the point of view of middle school students who are battling a series of different types of climate disasters in North America. Gosh, I said, let's pick up the pace here and on a higher note. I just brought it down a bit, but anyway, yeah, those are still kids' books that will really resonate with kids and yet deal with the social issues that we're all dealing with.
Those are very, very good suggestions. I want to open it up again to any other ideas, anything that came to mind. I see that there are more things being added to our chat, so don't forget to scoop those up in something in there. You know, it's not to say you'll be interested in all of those books, but they're just suggestions that you might find interesting. You know, you might find there's something in there that's interests you. And keep in mind that just because you pick up a book, especially, you know, it's one of those tomes of 1,000 pages, doesn't mean you have to read the whole thing, but it could be interesting. Maybe you do because the context. But I find my favorite books to read are encyclopedias and dictionaries, you know, and part of the reason is I can pick those books up and flip to a page and find something interesting. And dictionaries are unique, especially when you get specialized dictionaries. They're unique in a way that when they give you a word, they can send you down a kind of rabbit hole, you know, because if it's a new subject that you're unfamiliar with, it will explain the words, explain that word with words you also probably are not familiar with. And so pretty soon you have this increased vocabulary, and those words are used because the words are representative of, they represent ideas. And if you haven't thought about those ideas, you probably haven't thought about that word. And the examination of those words, I find quite interesting. Bilingual dictionaries can be interesting also because they introduce us to ideas often, not always, but often that don't exist readily in the English language. You know, they have different connotations. Even when you take a word like dog, you know, in another language, just the context in which people think about dogs in that, you know, language is a whole different thing. And it often shows up in the definition of what a dog is. You know, like, for example, in the US, we eat pigs and we have dogs as pets. In Papua New Guinea, they have pigs as pets and they eat the dogs, you know, and for them, what we do is completely weird. In fact, I was confronted by a person in Papua New Guinea about that very subject. That's why I remember it distinctly. He asked me, "You Americans are really strange. Why do you eat pigs and keep those dogs as pets? You guys are really weird," you know. So any other books? We're getting close to the end of our time now, but you know, we're looking for new books. Is there somebody out there? I can't
Yes.
see who.
I would like to share something.
Yeah, sure.
Nico again, and I would like to get back to the children's, what children are all about. You know, I'm one of those individuals who grew up quite a long time ago. As a small child, I was introduced to a small, tiny little library in Eagle Butte once the river was flooded and we were putting up our lives in Eagle Butte. And I was introduced to a series of books that were written in 1916. One of them is, well, not all of them, but a lot of them. And they were the Thornton W. Burgess books. And that series captured me to such a degree that I was like that little boy that Terry was talking about, who kept reading the books over and over and over again. Well, I looked online, I looked everywhere for these books because I wanted to share them with some of the kids that are in my community, and finally was able to get some. But on that same note, there was a lady years and years ago who wrote a book similar to Thornton W. Burgess's books. Her name was Mary Sully. She was the sister of Alacara Deloria. And I have been in a search for that book for so long that I can't even tell you. It's called 26 River Creatures Tell Their Life Stories. I've had a number of people jump on the bandwagon to try to help me find this book. And isn't that interesting that we have people tell us stories about books they have read, and they resonate to such a powerful way that it doesn't leave your memory. And so that search is ongoing. And anybody who is on this session today, if you happen to have it or know where I can get it, please let me know.
I'm probably in that book, you know, somewhere.
Thank you.
You know, that's one thing I love about libraries is it's like a treasure hunt. You know, whether you're looking for a specific book like that, or you just go in and you find these gems and pick them up, and it might be something you never would have picked up before. I mean, I've just expanded my reading list from what you folks have talked about this morning. So thank you for that. But yeah, any book is a treasure, but digging around in the library is definitely like a treasure hunt.
Well, we're getting kind of the point we need to wrap up here, Terri. Any last words about new books or where to find them or anything like that?
Well, many of you have referenced your local libraries. Definitely check your local libraries. And if you don't see it, ask, because your library may be able to get it for you. A lot of our communities don't have bookstores, unfortunately. Even in Rapid City, our number of bookstores has dwindled. But thank goodness there are bookshops available online. Amazon, of course, is a good one. Lenico, I wonder if you've tried something like thrift.com, which is a secondhand bookseller. I have found some fairly obscure titles using thrift. And it's interesting because once a book leaves the library, that doesn't mean that book is dead and gone. It has another life and another life and another life beyond that. So yeah, books
you
are
for
always
that. I have.
available.
I
I'm
have.
sorry?
I have been on those searches, and I even have a friend who has put me in touch with a bookstore in England. because
Okay.
That book has been, it's not to be found in the United States, but there was a copy in England. Isn't that crazy?
Wow. Wow.
Well, we've
Yeah.
actually come to the end of our time here. It's now 11:30, and we try to be punctual when we can. So thank you very much, Terri. This has been a very interesting conversation, and I hope all of you will join us again next week, same time, same station. Bring your friends. The Brainstorming the Human Connection, brought to you by the South Dakota Humanities Council. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.